various labor unions are flying their colors at the Eagle Square as they remember the sacrifices made by Nigerian workers towards national development. This year, Nigeria's labor unions are harping on labor, politics and the quest for good governance. And the speeches at this event reflect just that. Beginning with the Minister of Labour and Employment, who's been in the crosshairs with members of the Academic Staff Union of Universities after failing to resolve issues leading to the shutdown of universities in the country. He emphasizes the need for mutual respect between Labour and the government, asking Labour to leverage on its large figures in the next elections.
100 million voters is no joke. So please, harvest this. Let us get the PVCs done so that Labour can dictate the way of governance of their country.
The speech from the president of the Nigeria Labour Congress highlights the challenges faced by workers in Nigeria. He has very strong words for Nigeria's political class.
It is only a fair political class that will keep citizens concerned and issues of national development as footnotes in 2023 political agenda.
For the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, the strike action embarked upon by the Academic Staff Union of Universities is one that is close to his heart. He calls for more dialogue between both parties.
I want to appeal again to the Academic Staff Union of Universities and the broader labor community to seek the path of dialogue. Disagreement and debate have always been a part of the relationship between labor and government. But even as we disagree today, we must not do so as mortal adversaries, but as members of the same progressive family.
The working man is Nigeria's hero, and that's what May the 1st affords the Nigerian government and its people an opportunity to assess the challenges facing the working man and see his contributions towards national development. The Vice President in his speech talking about the correlation between labor and progressive thought, compelling labor unions not to treat government as mortal enemies, but argue with them as part of one family trying to move the nation forward. He's also promising that the challenges facing Nigeria's working man will be addressed in the nearest future. From Eagle Square in Abuja, Kayla Megwa, Channels Television News.
Oh yes, indeed. I did say Happy Workers' Day, even though the celebration was yesterday, but you didn't think we were going to miss that, did you? Well, not certainly, because we also are workers, and I did say that one of the privileges on this job is being able to discuss issues that also directly affect you. By you, I also mean me. This morning we have the pleasure of hosting on our program Onyekon Olasonye, who's the second national deputy president of the Trade Union Congress, that's TUC, and also the national president of the Association of Senior Staff of Banks, Insurance and Financial Institutions. Ma'am, you're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Happy Workers' Day to you.
Thank you.
Well, yesterday was quite a remarkable day. In many states, this was celebrated. Workers' Day was celebrated despite the fact that it was a Sunday and many people, of course, had to go to church. There's always a religious, let's say, obligation to be met on Sunday. Nonetheless, people showed their commitment to the Workers' Day by going to the stadium. And here in Abuja, it was at the Eagle Square. I imagine that you were at the Eagle Square here in Abuja.
Yes.
And of course, the mood in recent times has been a bit tense between government and labor. Maybe last year it was a bit better, but this year this has come in the middle of ASU strike. What would you say was at the topmost agenda for labor when this year's Workers' Day was approaching?
Thank you. Yes, we know that Nigeria is a very religious country, And yesterday is one of the days for the Christian religion. But for Nigerian workers, it's one day out of 365 days that make the Workers' Day. So definitely we are the Eagle Square. And a major concern this year is about good governance, labor and politics. How can we influence the social development of the country and good governance? And that was what formed the theme of this year's topic, and that was our major concern, how we can influence now. Because over the year, we realized that we have a partnership with government that doesn't respect and think that we need a sort of a agreement on how to implement the development of the country. So this time around, we think and we said another election is coming, then we must be more influential in determining what will happen going forward in the country. And that was our major theme.
Interesting. Well, a few days before that, I do know that the NLC, which is, let's say an umbrella body for almost all workers, had a press conference where they said that, they were giving the federal government an ultimatum to intervene in ASU strike, otherwise the NLC itself will go on strike. I do not know if your union was a part of that. Was your union a part of that?
Thank you. We have two labor centers in Nigeria, NSC and TUC. But if you recollect, precisely about 3 months ago, TUC also brought out a decision after a NEC meeting that we are going to join in solidarity strike with ASUS. So this time around, this strike is not about NSC or TUC. It's about all Nigerian workers coming to realize that the core foundation of the existence of Nigeria, which is education, is being gradually eroded. So we need to do something drastic about that.
Has there been any concrete response in that regard, to your knowledge?
None has been. If there has been, NLC will not come up again and said, we are going this way. There have been series of meetings between ASUS, NASU, and federal government, and there have never been any concrete results. If not, the universities will not be shut down as at present.
Well, the niceties have been done, the march pasts have been done, and the speeches have been given. And today is another day. Yes, it's a public holiday for the Eid celebrations. But one would imagine that moving forward from the ceremonies that happened yesterday, there should be something to work with moving forward. What is the expectation of Labour in this regard after the event of yesterday?
Thank you. For Labour, our expectation is that there should be a rapid and a balanced economic development for the country. And that has always been our motto before now. We realize that there should be a reduction, there should be a sort of reduction in the imbalance in income and the economic power of all Nigerians. We are not saying we want equal partner with everybody. I need to also put it to you that now when we talk about labor, now it's not only the worker. We are also talking about the informal sector, the lesser Nigerians, those that cannot feed themselves, those that have nothing to work about. Before Nigerians can have a new development, something we are all proud of, there should be improvement in production. We cannot be consuming what we are not producing. We cannot allow our consumption to be above what we are producing. And if we are not producing locally in the country, it will affect the forest demand, which we are not in control of. And the inflation will keep on going up. So our thinking and our march party yesterday is just like a call-up to ourselves to remember that this is the area we are thinking about. This is what we expect from the government. And that's the reason we are all, both TUC and LSC, forming a political commission that next year election, we want to have an impact in it.
Well, that certainly will wake up the politicians when you say that next year election, you form the political commission. The NLC president was quoted as saying that they promised 16 million block votes to parties that care about labor. Maybe that's one of the reasons why we're seeing, some governors now increase minimum wage. We don't know. I'm just, speculating. But there have been questions as to how seriously government has taken labor over the years. Would you say that the respect the command of respect which Labour used to have, that when Labour opens his mouth, you know, there is, I don't know how to put it now, but a certain seriousness, a weightiness attached to the issues that, you know, Labour brings to the table. Would you say that that is eroding, or would you say that Labour still commands the sort of respect which it used to command back in the day?
Thank you. One thing I need to make clear is that being a worker, being Labour, we are first Nigerian. And in all decisions we take, we first take interest and consider the interests of our fatherland. Maybe because we operate from that angle, Nigerians felt that we are becoming weak. We are not. Before now, Labour think more about the welfare of their members. But we cannot continue thinking only of the welfare of our members in a situation we have found our country today. So because of that, we try to have a win-win. And that's the reason Nigerians felt that our power had been eroded. But we have realized that all shuttle of demands, all advice, everything we have discussed with the federal government concerning every aspect of the economic development, since they are not taking it into consideration, that's why we said, okay, this time around, we will not only discuss with somebody that will get there, and we not remember what we have discussed. Let us have a sort of a shuttle of demands. This is what we request from anybody coming. And any political party that said, okay, we will agree with this, we sign that, and we'll give them our block vote. Then if they are not implementing, it will be easier for us to say, we have this deal. We have this deal. Unlike before, when we don't have a real signed agreement, and we couldn't say we have a block vote. So that is the area we are looking at this time. So it's not that we are not, it's not that we are weak, or that we are not doing what is supposed to do, but we consider the sensitivity and the all situation in the country, the security, everything. And we felt that there should be a win-win approach to the way we take action this time around.
I want to look a little more specifically at your own union, the Association of Senior Staff of Banks, Insurance and Financial Institutions. This is one place where a lot of workers have complained, where they think that a lot of workers are currently holding the short end of the stick. There have been complaints of casualization in the banks. The working in the bank is not exactly as, I don't know what word I'm looking for right now, but the complaints of workers in banks in recent times have reached deafening proportions. But there have been questions as to how seriously their complaints are being taken. As president of this union, would you say that you have been able to get the ears of those who own the banks, or the ears of the regulator, who should oversee the banks, or even the ear of the Labour Minister, who should be concerned if workers are not getting fairly treated in terms of how the banks operate?
Thank you so much. Let me start by saying that within the financial sector, the banks, insurance, and other financial sectors, because the law specified that in every sector there should be 3 unions, the union, the senior, and the employers themselves. There are 3 unions. But ASSBIFI is just one of it. There is no BIFI. But the saddening part of it is that there are more casual workers that doesn't belong to any of these unions in the banks. So most of the banks, we have over 75% people that are casual workers. And now the law regulating employment in Nigeria is not favorable to casual workers. I would say even that there is no law. And the little we can do, the implementation and the enforcement is not also there. So what we have done to date is that we have been able to meet with Ministry of Labour, and that there's now a regulation put in place for the casual workers. We are thinking more that there should be career path for the casual workers. They are Nigerians. There should be dignity of labor for them. And their income should be something that is worth living. You know, when people talk about labor, that we are talking about minimum wage all the time, and that there should be more sacrifice from labor. They didn't consider 2 things, or 2 or 3 things. Number one is that the minimum wage, as at present, is something that is not allowing Nigerians to live at even the minimum living standard. We are not meeting the normal living standard. Number 2, there is no social security or welfareism in place. Number 3, it is still these same workers that are paying the tax that we needed to develop our country. You see that it's only employers and employees in Nigeria that pay adequate tax. We have so many institutions, so many organizations that are foreign corporate institutions that are not paying even the adequate tax, even the politicians. What is the evidence that they are paying this tax? So as long as there are also policies in place that are not favorable to workers, and the workers are not treated as co-partners, we don't have the dignified labor in existence, then there's no way that the casual workers will be able to enjoy the benefits of being workers in Nigeria. So on this, we are working with the Ministry of Labor. We have been able to put in place a regulation that can protect them. We are more protected, but we are lesser than them. So if we are like 3 in this room, it's only one person that have the benefit of a collective agreement protection, and the remaining didn't have. It's of no value. So that is the problem with the financial sector. Yes, we have the support of Ministry of Labor, despite that the regulation have been in place, but it has not been turned to law because it still needs to go to FEC for ratification. But for the other regulators, we have not been having it as good as we want. It's like they concentrate more on profit making for our employers rather than for us workers to be able to have a win-win. Because when you keep on encouraging our employers to ask some of us to go to pay inadequate salaries, inadequate remuneration for the contract workers because they want to get more profit, and you are allowing them to gradually replace Nigerian workers with technologies, with robots, with so many technologies that are doing more of work, and they have been laid off in the banks, then we are increasing unemployment in the society. So government needs to come and have a win-win with both the profit making of our employers and the condition of Nigerians. You know that a single worker in Nigeria has over 20 dependents. So when you are gradually asking them to go and you are replacing them with technology, it will also affect the unemployment rate in Nigeria and also lead to the security situation we find ourselves.
It's a very complex issue because, I mean, it would seem that on the one hand, your numbers are being gradually eroded, those who are allowed to unionize. On the other, there's very little you can do to protect those who are still working. They're known by another name, casual workers, but they're working, and they're working many times full-time. Yeah. And there's very little that you can do to protect them, even though you know, there is a union that exists in that particular sector. It's a rather complex issue. But it's a good thing to note that you are doing something on the side to see how it is that the law can actually, or the regulation can actually look after them. I know that, you know, we might not be able to exhaust all that we would like to talk about, so let me flip this conversation right now to Lagos, because I know that we have another guest on standby. Gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Maupa. We have with us Professor Akeem Akinwale, who is a professor of Employment Relations and Labor Studies at the Department of Employment Relations and Human Resource Management in UNILAG. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Let me begin from something that Mrs. Olasanye just mentioned about the casual workers.
Okay.
In 2019, the same association said they had 65% of bank staff being casual workers. Now she says they are 75%. Yeah. Almost 80% in some cases, or some other stories that we hear. And the striking thing is that, according to her, they're not protected under any labor law. Is that a concern for you as a professor of employment?
It is a great concern. In fact, I've written about that. I conducted a study among contract employees in various banks, and their conditions are very appalling. And when you look at it, majority of them do not earn up to 100,000 naira per month. So the salary range is usually between 50,000 naira to 80,000 naira. So they come very early. They work for even more than 8 hours of work per day. So they close late for this amount. And when you look at the practical interpretation of the salary, you realize that what they earn is not up to 4,000 naira per day. So ordinary laborers in the informal economies who have never gone to school earn as much as 3,500 naira per day for working for like 3 to 4 hours. when you now compare that with the working conditions of these contract employees in banks, the situation is of great concern, both to me and this should be of great concern to all Nigerians.
You know, the financial sector, pardon me, is one of the most regulated in Nigeria. The regulation is big. So I wonder, because, I mean, this is also academic in some sense. There needs to be a lot of research, gather data, speak to those in authority. I wonder what you make of why this is happening. Because you'd expect, one, is very regulated. Two, there's a lot of money that flows in that sector. In fact, when people declare losses, you see most banks actually declaring profit. So it's not I imagine it's not a function of fun. So what exactly would you say is responsible? And it's not just banks, really. You have this across some other subsectors. So what have you found? I think it would be important to know.
Yeah, there is regulation, really. And the Apex Bank discourages the excessive use of contract employees in bank. And there is a period within which a contract employee should have been converted to full-time. So I also discovered that less than 10% have benefited from such opportunity to get converted from being a contract staff to being a full-time staff. And these contract staff usually come from a third-party employment agency. So what usually happens is that they usually get re-engaged in order to meet that regulation that specifies that the contract employment should not extend beyond certain period. So in that, you can see the reality is such that there's a kind of hidden, I'll call it a malpractice. On paper, it appears that, yes, there's compliance with this regulation. But in reality, because the same contract staff is now being seen to be a new employee. But these contract staff have always been there. But they usually get a kind of renewal of employment contract through a third-party employment relationship.
Is that to say that the regulator is turning a blind eye to this issue? Is that to say that the regulator is unaware of this breach? I mean, that you are in.
That's the way it seems. Okay. That's the way it seems.
So is that my is that to say that the regulator is powerless to do anything about it, or they're just condoning it as well?
Well, I think the contract employees themselves are not voicing out, really.
Would you voice out if it was you? You know, I mean, they are third-party,
yeah, at some
employees.
point, we really need to voice out, really. At some point, because the situation is not sustainable. What I discover is quite disturbing, really. And part of my recommendation is that they need to really unionize, because through unionism, the collective power of organized labor can be used as a strategy to get away from bondage or to get out of a frustrating, disturbing, dehumanizing employment situation.
Do you think the law would permit them to unionize?
There is a freedom of association, right to unionize, established by the International Labour Organization. Nigeria has ratified that. So under the Universal Bill of Rights, there is freedom of movement, freedom of expression, right to life. So yes,
and if
by law.
Yeah, and if the company says unionize and lose your job, what happens?
There is protection under the law, basically, because if it can be established that they are being victimized for wanting to unionize, they can seek redress in a competent court of law. And such termination will be treated as wrongful dismissal. And they can sue for damages, really. So this is clear, and nobody can dispute this.
Well, there is so much to unpack, Professor. So let's take a short break, and when we return, we'll look at some other conditions of service, not just in banks, but everywhere else, as Kadi has mentioned. Please stay with us. Professor Akinwale is still with us this morning. We're talking about the circumstances within which, workers work in Nigeria and all of that, but perhaps a bit of background might help people to understand why this whole Labor Day thing is necessary and what impact it really does make.
Yeah, these are a very interesting question. Labor Day is a commemoration of struggle by organized labor, and this struggle can be traced back to 136 years ago, especially what happened in the United States of America, when the organized labor, then led by American Federation of Labor, demanded for reduction in working hours from average of 13 to 14 hours to 8 hours of work per day. It was a serious struggle because many employers of labor in the United States then were not ready. They were unwilling, and they strongly opposed to such demand. But it took the determination and resilience of most workers in the United States then to protest and demonstrate, and they were led by the Labor Center in the US, American Federation of Labor, and all the workers were mobilized, and eventually they took to the streets. They refused to go to work, and it was a serious struggle. A lot of lives were lost in the process. Many workers sustained injury. But at the end of the day, the government saw the need to intervene, and also employers of labor were mandated to accede to the demand of the organized labor then. So eventually, a law was formulated to reduce hours of work to 8 hours. And that's the base, that's the foundation of 8 hours of work per day, which has become global. So a struggle that started in the US is now of benefit to workers all over the world.
Pardon me, I was going to make that point about, so it used to be over 12 hours at that time.
Yes.
Now it's been reduced to 8 hours. But is it really 8 hours these days? Because with the advent of COVID came remote work. So there's hybrid work. So you do work at home and then you do work at work. But the essence is, have we really been able to reduce it to 8 hours? Is that still true today?
Well, that's the law. So, and employees have the right to operate within that framework. So, it's a commendable achievement. And even in some countries, the hours are being reviewed downward. In France, in Sweden, and some other countries, even in Germany. So, the hours are even being reduced. So, some countries are even doing better, by giving workers opportunity to enjoy what is called work-life balance. So, if in Nigeria, if employers are keeping their employees beyond 8 hours, the employees have the right to call the attention of the employer to, they don't need to be confrontational about it. It's about discussion. Because the employers cannot say no.
Yeah, it's one thing to...
And of course, there's also provision for overtime. In case if maybe due to emergency or due to some reasons, if employers want employees to stay at work beyond the normal time.
I see you're smiling as you're making this point, but go ahead.
So there's provision for overtime. So employees can benefit what is called overtime pay.
Is that in public or private sector?
Both.
Okay, now, it's one thing for people to be at work. It's another thing to be as productive as they're expected. So
yes.
We're talking about Labor Day because we need to give attention to, I don't know if, that's where kind of this question is going to go next, and I hope this is not a too far digression, but let's speak to the productivity of the labor force itself. There are those, he inferred something, that today it's, with COVID comes hybrid work. Many people may not have the skills that they need to do the hybrid work, Zoom meetings, WebEx meetings, Cisco meetings, and all those things on the one hand, and then the skills of being able to use those technology and stuff like that, and then the quality of work expected from the people who are doing this work, hybrid or not. Those questions are there. So what's your assessment of that in the light of Labour Day?
First, Nigerian workers should be commended for their active commitment to service, really, both in the private and public sector. I'm not talking of those employees who got their own job through the back door or through the patronage. So if we remove that and we focus on a normal work situation in which qualified personnel are recruited to get the job done. So the recruitment process usually takes into consideration competence, qualification, experience. And all of these play out when the employees adapt to the work situation by getting the job done. So now, situation warrants that, okay, people work from home because of a medical emergency. First, employers have responsibility to train their employees on how to work from home, do hybrid work, and also provide infrastructure that will enable the employees to deliver. So through regular training, the employee will have been accustomed to the new work method. And that is happening, really, especially in the private sector, right? So employees are being trained to adjust to the new reality, and they are excelling in that area. Also, in addition, employees also need to take responsibility to upgrade their skills in order to remain relevant because of the competition in the labor market. So if employees are slack or if they relax, they can be overtaken. They can be, so there could be some issues.
Okay, we're going to toss this to Abuja in a moment. But, that question I was asking about how we transition from over 12 hours to 8 hours, I think the fear now is why we've transitioned back to perhaps 12 hours because work is no more conventional, clock in, clock out. It's now a mixture of different things. You can always work from home, work at home, and, it's really blurred. The lines are blurred when it comes to that. But help us address this because earlier on you said workers can approach their employers and seek redress, maybe when it comes to overtime, hours of work, or, the condition of service. And you said that the employer will not say no. But we know that, really, if there's anything, most times they hear no. So how do Nigerian workers seek redress on varying issues? Where do they get help from? Do they have to take it up via the law? Do they have to deliberately join a union to seek redress? Do they have to approach their employers? Exactly how can workers get better service? How can they go about this?
When you say we, I wanted to ask you, who are you referring to? You said we are transiting to 12 hours from 8 hours, but I want to assume
general labor force.
I want to assume this problem is pronounced in the informal sector. It is the people in the informal sector that are not protected, that are not covered by these 8 hours of work per day because the government law seems not to consider them as such, and they seem not to have enough clout or power to enjoy these benefits. So I think that is the area where we really need to get the problem solved. And currently, I'm happy to inform you that the organized labor in Nigeria is making attempts, serious attempts, to unionize the workers' associations in the informal sector. And I'm in support of that, really. Because when informal workers are unionized, situation in the country will be transformed, really.
Will that also include casual workers?
Yes. Because casualization is a form of informality in the workplace. Because
informal work in a formal environment.
Yes, exactly. So if that happens, you can imagine what's going to happen. That is when the real collective power of organized labor will be in a full glare.
Okay,
really.
I'm wondering how the senior bank staff are going to react to that. Let's
she's still here. I don't know. Do you think that that's something that will work?
Yes, thank you. It's something that will work. Because as at present, the same Ministry of Labor that regulates labor acts is also the same, excuse me, institution that try to regulate the consultancy firm, the outsourcing firms that bring these casual workers into the labor center. The law specifies that there are some core functions in the banks that should not be casualized. But unfortunately, there's nobody implementing that. So as long as those people, and because of the unemployment level in Nigeria, somebody that have been out of work for years, by the time they get to a new work environment and they realize that between your collective rights as a worker and your daily income, the less than 100,000 we just speak about, they will be ready to forego. Most of them sign all these things before they realize what is in it for them. They sign based on the desperation that for the first time I'm getting a job after maybe leaving the higher institution 2-3 years. So they accepted anything. And we have realized that some of these outsourcing companies, yes, the law specifies that you have the right to belong to any union, but they will tell them indirectly, not directly, that here we don't want you to belong. So even when the union is trying as much as possible to encourage them about their right at workplace, the fear of job loss is really affecting them. We have a situation of people in some of these financial institutions running to our secretariat to complain about things. But the unfortunate thing is that even when we decide to take it up as Nigerian workers, because what we are doing now is that despite that they are casual workers, we are taking their case as workers. That is why we are including the informal sector to the union. But unfortunately, out of fear, I've seen a situation that somebody reported a case, a breach of right, and we took up the case with the institution and Ministry of Labor, and the person came out and said, we did not discuss anything like that. Nothing like this is happening. So all we are trying to do now is to bring out fear from all Nigerian workers, either casual or non-casual. And as long as we get there, trying to balance it up with the fact that it's the right that they have, I think there will be improvement. But I also need to say something in respect to what the professor said in Lagos, that they can go to court. I want you to know that in the situation of the country, any case in court, we have cases in court from 2014. We have cases in court from 2006. So because of that, employer prefer us to take case to court because they know they have the liberty and the money and the means to drag the cases. But unfortunately, it's always easier and faster to go through industrial action and industrial relation. So when we expect Nigerians to go to court to say that I'm a breach of my constitutional rights, it's been affected in the workplace, but most of the time the fear of job loss, the fear of unemployment, and the fear of the duration of the case we take in court is also another thing we consider.
And that's something quite a number of employers are also aware of and maybe sometimes seek to exploit. I feel a little sad that we don't have a union representing workers in the government sector. But do you oftentimes feel a tension between workers who are in the government sector and workers who are in the private sector? Because you talked about minimum wage and how sometimes the talk of minimum wage directly also affects workers in the private sector, which is where you belong. Many times when we talk about minimum wage, the conversation is usually held within government context. For instance, we have seen the March pass now, and a new minimum wage announced in some states. In Lagos State, is about pensioners. In Edo State, is about workers in general. For a number of people, that should generally affect all the workers in Edo State, whether they be in the private sector or in the government sector. But does it really happen that way, or sometimes when those increments are announced at the state level, does it also extend to the private sector, or does it stop in the government circle?
Thank you. There are more union in the public sector even more than the private sector. And they have the population to take some decision and pull some weight around. Now coming to minimum wage, there is a National Wages Commission Board that speak about minimum wage and its effect on the private sector. Like, for example, currently, the minimum wage for the Federal Republic of Nigeria is 30,000. And the casual workers in the financial institution and in most places are being paid, let's say, 65, 70, 80, 90, up to 100, which is technically above the minimum wage. But the consequential adjustments are not there for them because it seems as if you're already earning. That's why we said that for our sector, we are working about creating a career development plan for the casual workers. Like my colleague said, you notice that because the law says that after 2 years, in the labor law is 6 months, but in our sector we have been able to fight that it should be 2 years, that you must be employed, be given full employment. And since it is not the bank that are the direct employers of these people, the law permits an outsourcing company to employ the casual workers and take them to a bank. So at the end of 2 years, two things will happen. Either they give them a new letter of employment, or maybe the same outsourcing company is outsourcing for Bank A or for Bank B. So it will be willing to move you and start a fresh appointment in Bank B. So because of all those things, we have that issue that the increase in salary. So you will see somebody in the all contract workers, not only in the financial institutions now, that has worked for 10 years, but his letter of employment will be changed 2 years because they give such a person a new employment at every 2 years and the same salary. So that is why it is not felt in the private sector that there is a minimum wage for those that are casual workers, that we have not been able to create a career path for them. We are working on a situation that you may be a contract workers, because we find it tough that if we are insisting there should be no contract workers in Nigeria, we are delaying the process. So what we are doing now is that there may be, but they must earn a living wage, and there must be a career path for them. Let them be able to grow. Even if we call them casual 1, casual 2, casual 3, let there be an increase and a growth in career. So it's not that I've just worked 2 years and that I've worked 8 years, 2 years is being counted and there will be no experience to rely on. Let it be possible that, yes, I have spent 8 years in Bank A as a contract worker, so I have 8-year experience, so that when Bank B needs somebody of 8-year experience, even if you be a casual worker, you can easily flow into that thing. That's what we are working on now.
Well, I have many questions to ask you, ma'am. I was going to ask you about, because when we talk about productivity, sometimes there might also be that push and pull between the private and government sectors, especially when you look at the fact that a lot of regulation over the private sector comes from government sector, and it would seem that different rules apply depending on where you work. You know, some people seem to be enjoying, and some other people seem to be really, you know, bearing the brunt. But sadly, we're out of time. Hopefully, we'll be able to keep this conversation going. Thank you so much for coming on this morning. And thank you for your work with the senior staff of the Association of Senior Staff of Banks, Insurance, and Financial Institutions. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you,
well, we've been speaking with Onyekon Olasonye, who is the second National Deputy President of the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria, that's TUC, and also the National President of the Association of Senior Staff of Banks, Insurance, and Financial Institutions. That's it from this end. It's over now to you in Lagos.
Well, thank you, Mark. Well, Prof, last minute now on this matter. For you, as we close, what are those issues that are critical to labor that employers need to give priority to?
I will say welfare and job security. So workers should not lose their job. Workers should...
What is it that puts their jobs at risk?
Pardon?
What is it that puts their jobs at risk?
If pay is inadequate, that is risky because it will affect their emotion, it will affect their temperament, it will affect their ability to cope with basic needs. Okay. And the question you ask can easily be answered because we have solution in Nigeria. We should go back to our records. Since 1964, ILO has been working with Nigerian government. In 1980, there was JASPA, Job and Skill Program for Africa. Nigerian government then subscribed to that. And a report came out. That report said, first thing first. What is that first thing first? Meeting the basic need of people of Nigeria. 10 years after, in the 1990s, especially in 1996, ILO mission work with government officials and stakeholders, and they arrive at national employment policy. That document is still there. So this document is comprehensive. It
answers all of my questions.
It collaborated with industrial training fund. Okay. It collaborated with national wages, income, and salaries, national salaries, incomes, and wages commission, and other government parastatals in charge of improving working conditions of Nigerian workers. Okay. So we need to check our record and implement these important recommendations that can improve the life of workers in Nigeria. The pay must be adequate. National minimum wage is insufficient. If you look at it in practical terms,
well, I
need to say this, please. 1 second.
Yeah.
30,000 naira is 1,500 naira per day. Look at it. So look at cost of living, cost of transportation.
Okay.
Even if you double it, it's not sufficient to live a decent life in anywhere in Nigeria. So we need to look into that.
Well,
then job security is key. People must have rest of mind that I cannot lose my job.
Yeah.
I can express myself freely. Fundamental rights of workers should be respected.
Well, again, as Mark also said, we run completely out of time. I would have wanted to ask you, what are those working conditions that need to be improved upon? But maybe some other time we have to take that on. Professor Akim Akinwale, Professor of Employment Relations and Labor Studies at UNILAG. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
You're welcome.
Well, we have been talking about leadership for a bit. We'll talk a little more after now. Stay with us.